Okay, we are going to start. I want to thank all of our at current 450 and climbing participants who are joining the conversation to listen to a conversation about what are the 150 greatest Jewish pop songs of all time. What are they? How did we choose them? Why? What didn't we choose? What should we have chosen? And I am joined by an esteemed panel of guests here. And just to show how esteemed, I'm just going to give a brief introduction to everyone who's here. And I'm going to ask everyone one quick question. We will start in my upper left square. We are joined by musician, DJ, and SiriusXM personality and songwriter Hesta Prynn. And Hesta, I'm going to ask the same question of everybody. What were you listening to most recently today? And what circumstances?
So I, on our channel on Sirius, there's a lot of prog fans. So I was listening to Rush, Tom Sawyer, but I was listening to the Z-Trip remix of Tom Sawyer by Rush, and arguing with my drummer husband if it was better or worse or a shanda to alter Neil Peart's drum intro.
Okay, I kind of like the Nandy Bushnell drum version of Tom Sawyer. I thought that was pretty good, which I saw on the other day. Thank you, Hesta. In my lower left square, we have Jennifer Gilmore, the author of Golden Country, The Mothers, and We Were Never Here, among other books. And Jennifer also an aficionado of Lou Reed, which is what brought her to us today. Jen, what were you listening to today? Anything come to mind?
Well, to be honest, I was listening to the 150 songs, but I was also listening to Peaches, trying to find an appropriate song that we might have used in this list, and I did not come up with one.
Okay, all right, there you have it. In my center square, we have Rolling Stone contributor, author, baseball aficionado, former music critic of Subnation magazine, and current music critic of The Forward, Dan Epstein. You got a lot of vinyl over there. What have you been listening to most recently?
Well, actually, as I was getting ready for this, I was listening to nice Jewish boy Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, which I'm a big Herb nut, and I've recently managed to acquire every album that he released on vinyl in mono. So that's been my big record collecting achievement this month.
Excellent. And Dan also has written about Herb Alpert for The Forward in the past. We are having some requests in the chat to do closed captioning. I'm not sure if that is a thing or if we are able to do that, but if we can, we will. And if we can't, I apologize profusely. In my lower right corner, joining us, we have Alan Light, who, among other things, was the former editor-in-chief of Spin and Vibe, and also a consulting producer on a feature-length documentary about Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, which somehow is not #1 on the list. He may be appalled by that. If so, we will ask him if that is so. Alan, thanks for joining us. What have you been listening to today?
Well, sorry for the dramatic late entrance, but I had to sprint here from my SiriusXM radio show, which just went off the air. We had a wide range of stuff to deal with on the air today. So there was a Malian singer. We were talking with the producer of that album today. And today is Ice-T's 64th birthday. So I was listening to and playing some Ice-T today in his honor. That I would say is the newest thing I can offer you.
Okay, new enough. And last, but certainly not least, in the upper right corner, with the man in the hat, Seth Rogovoy, who put this whole thing together. I kind of oversaw it, but Seth was the one who kind of engineered the concept, was the one who got all the writers, who brought everybody together, edited the whole damn thing so I could concentrate on other stuff. Seth is currently working on a biography for Oxford University Press about George Harrison. I believe it's tentatively called Dark Horse, but maybe it's not. I don't know. Seth, what have you been listening to today?
Well, very predictably, I've been listening to the Beatles and George Harrison. I wouldn't say that I don't get to listen to anything else, but pretty much for the next year, it's Beatles and George Harrison 24/7.
Okay.
And I wish the book could be called Dark Horse, but there's already been one. So right now it's being called Within You, Without You.
That works too. That's good. Hopefully you'll beat anybody else to that title. I haven't heard anyone with it yet. I'm sorry.
Don't steal it.
Okay. All right. So Seth, who is, as I said, spearheaded this whole thing, will be leading this conversation. I'll ask some questions. A couple ground rules, or not ground rules, or pieces of information. If anybody wants to ask any questions, make any comments, unfortunately, we can't have all 500 people talking. Just use the chat. Who am I? I am the executive editor of The Forward. Thank you, Edward Shorter, for asking me. And that'll have to do for now. And I was listening today on my walk in Morningside Park. I was listening to a song called Pachinko by Eight Bold Souls, an odd jazz outfit out of Chicago that I haven't heard from in a long time. So, and someone in the chat was listening to Guster. Okay, so we could go on like this all day, but I want to start off with a question to everyone in the panel. The obvious question everybody asks and everybody complains about is, you're doing a list of the 150 greatest Jewish pop songs. What's a Jewish pop song and how do you know what it is when you hear it? Anybody want to weigh in on that?
Well, I think, one of the things that was interesting to me about this whole concept and certainly the assignment when I received it, to make out my ballot, was that this isn't just great songs by Jewish artists, that this goes deeper than that. This is songs that somehow relate to the Jewish experience and doesn't need to even have to be by Jewish artists. And I think that made for a much more interesting list, because I think, as Seth noted in the intro, this could have easily been, 150 songs split, 5 ways between Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, Neil Diamond, et cetera, Lou Reed. And so to me, that made it a lot more fun.
And Seth, did you lay any ground rules when you were starting this whole thing? Was those the basic ground rules?
I did. The parameters, Dan just really put it perfectly, so I don't have much more to add. And the parameters were exactly what he said. It had nothing to do with the artist being Jewish or not being Jewish, just like the contributors had nothing to do with them being, I didn't ask people if they were Jewish or not, or prove it. So it was basically songs that had spoke in some way towards Jewishness, historical, cultural, religious, conceptually, in some way. That was it.
Yeah, I do think Dan stated it well, that I think, it seems like most people took it, certainly the way it was presented and seeing how the list came out, as a far more expansive approach to what could constitute a Jewish song, and that it was not just the best songs by Jewish artists, which would be a very different list than this is. And so what does that mean? Well, does that mean something that's a theme that we associate with Judaism? Does that mean anything that draws on Old Testament texts, prayers, phrases? Does that mean a Yiddish phrase or a Jewish food? And I think, I certainly looked at all of that as fair game. And I think, interestingly, last week we had Seth and Hesta were on our radio show on Debatable on Sirius talking about this package. And Hesta said something that I hadn't articulated, but thought about after you said it. You said things that somehow made these ideas, made Judaism, made these artists seem cool, seem like there was something that was contributing, moving forward, making you think about this stuff in a different way that you felt proud or thoughtful or just cool about. And I think that's right. I mean, I think that, I was glad to not see, Two Live Jews, It's So Human, like the sort of there's a few that snuck on there that I kind of wish didn't, the corny Jew jokes that, I don't think are greatest anything. But I think that the greatness part also felt like it was moving the ball forward.
I want to kick it over to Hesta, because Hesta actually has another engagement, and you chose a song to write about that was a little unexpected. We didn't really expect to see it on the list. How did I Got a Feeling by the Black Eyed Peas show up on this list?
It's so funny because when Alan kind of sent this over to me and said, I think you might be interested in this, that was the first song. That was like it was a struggle to sort of figure out the other ones in my angle, and I did. But that was the one I was like, oh, the most Jewish song. Of course, it's I Got a Feeling by the Black Eyed Peas. And the reason I thought of that, and my piece was really about, sort of tongue in cheek in a way about Long Island, bar mitzvah culture. But when I think about, growing up in this kind of Long Island bar mitzvah thing and what it means to have generations of Jews together celebrating, that's the song that comes into my head. And I asked this question, there's two Hebrew parts of that song. He says, raise your glass, l'chaim, drink up, mazel tov, or something like that. And I posed the question, not in a little bit in a silly way, but not completely. Why would you write a song of celebration in Hebrew? And in answering that question, I believe it's because, Jews have been through so much. To have 4 generations of Jews in the same room is a statistical, improbability. It's a mathematical impossibility. And so to give us a song to celebrate in our own language, is a real gift. And whether it's something we've consciously talked about or not, it has become sort of the unofficial anthem of the bar mitzvah. It's the first song they play after the hora at every bar mitzvah. It's our celebrate good times, but it's written in our language. So to me, that really, really stood out.
And I assume, Seth, when you first heard the idea, you were like, wait, what? And then Hesta won you over with an argument much like the one she just offered us. Is that kind of how it went?
Exactly true. She said, I want to do that Black Eyed Peas song, and I want to call you and explain why. And I didn't really know the song. I got on the phone with Hesta and she explained why, which is basically what she just said, what she wrote in her essay, and it just blew my mind. And I said, absolutely, you got it, thank you. And so it was a total surprise, and it definitely made the top 10, hands down.
I think it subverted expectations a little bit, which I really liked. So when I wasn't doing sort of what was expected necessarily, like Hallelujah, I was thinking like, what is, I guess, more Jewish about it, which is, does subvert expectations. And so that's why I was very surprised to see it on the list, but then was really run over by it also. And then it's something that's celebratory, right? As opposed to victimhood and this, and we can get into that later, but I really love that about it too. Definitely unexpected.
Well, there was a fair amount of victimhood that shows up. You have 150
Yes.
songs. You can't avoid victimhood here and there. People are writing really fast in the chat and have all kinds of things they're throwing. I'm going to try and get to those as much as we can, but I do want to hear from everyone on the panel talking about the songs that they chose and why and what was it about them. The one person that came up in a lot, and let's talk, Dan. Can we talk to you a little bit about Brooklyn Roads and Neil Diamond? Like, I've known for a long time, are a huge kind of Neil Diamond fan, and why was this the one that leapt out for you as the one we should write about?
It really, I've always enjoyed Brooklyn Roads. I always thought it was a very strong song, but it really, the power of the song really hit home for me about, I guess it was about 7 years ago. I saw Neil at the Hollywood Bowl, and he did there was a series of 3 songs in a row that he did that all seemed to kind of connect and be about kind of the Jewish immigrant experience. There was America, there was Brooklyn Roads, and I'm forgetting the other one, but I remember that like in that moment, it was just like, oh wow, this is really, this is deeper than just like, childhood memories. That this really goes deeper into the experience of being, second generation or first generation child of Jewish immigrants growing up in Brooklyn. Now, I know my father is watching this, so I have to address this. My father, who grew up in Brooklyn, was a little annoyed by my choice of the song because, as he put it, there are no roads in Brooklyn. It's all streets and avenues. So I think a little poetic license there on Mr. Diamond's part, but I think it's a beautiful and very very powerful song.
I hope Dr. Epstein will forgive that poetic license. One thing I wanted to ask everybody, and Hesta, let me ask you, because I know you have to leave in 4 minutes.
Wow. Okay.
Sorry, it's just zooming by and you've got lots to do. And you got to go. But it's Alan mentioned there were a couple songs that made him cringe a little bit. You've looked at the list of 150 songs. Anything you're like, why did they include that?
I mean, I'm not a big fan of the Adam Sandler Hanukkah song. I like Alan. It doesn't turn me on to watch people make fun of Jews, and it certainly doesn't turn me on to watch Jews make fun of themselves. It's like we have enough of that on television. We have enough of that in popular culture, and that's not what we need. So when I was making my list, like Alan, kind of pointed out, I tried to think of things that made me feel cool to be Jewish, because I do think it's cool to be Jewish, because Jews are badass. And someone said in the chat, Jews are punk, and that's true, because you don't survive the things we've survived generation after generation and like rock it like we have unless it is cool to be Jewish. And one song I'll point out, because then I'm going to run, that I added to my list, which didn't make it to the 150, is a Jay-Z song called The Story of OJ. And it was one of the songs on his album 444. It's a real, hardcore hip hop song. And in the song, he says, and I'll just read the lyric because I put this on right away. He says, "You want to know what's more important than throwing away money at a strip club? Credit. You ever wonder why Jewish people own all of the property in America? That's how they did it." When I read that, that gives me chills. That makes me feel cool that Jay-Z, like the best rapper alive, my favorite rapper, looks at the legacy of Jews as something to aspire to. It's something that has taught him something and something that lifts him. That makes me feel like a badass. I love the way I feel in my body when I read those lyrics. And so I tried to think of 10 examples to share, and none of them were Adam Sandler, the Hanukkah song.
Hesta, I know you got to run, but I just, and maybe Adam said this in introducing you before, that your old band has a song on the list. And I wanted to hear you speak about what the Jewishness within your own music and your own Northern State music. If you want to leave us with that before you go.
It's such a challenging question. I think just when we were I was in a hip hop group called Northern State, an all girl rap group, and we worked with the Beastie Boys, and we worked with Chuck D has been supportive, and Muggs and Pete Rock and all these kind of legendary, The Roots we toured with for 2 years, all these legendary hip hop producers. And I think really leaning into really who we were, because we couldn't be like rap stars the way we knew them, was us leaning into our Judaism, I guess, and trying to be cool in who we were, and just Judaism was part of it. But a lyric that I had in that song was something like, are you a rapper? If you've got a sweatsuit and you're dripping in diamonds, are you a rapper or a mom from Long Island? And I thought that was really funny when I wrote it 20 years ago. Now that I am a mom on Long Island, I would want to actually revisit that and see quite how funny that is. But yeah, I mean, trying to carry the torch of the Beastie Boys forever was really what we were trying to do. Does that answer the question? God, it's so hard when Alan asks me a question sometimes.
Okay. Well, I thank Alan for asking. That was a good question to ask, and I'm glad he asked it to you before you had to depart. But thank you, Hesta, for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Good luck with the rest of your evening, whatever it entails. And we have a lot of conversation. I don't really want to get sidetracked into this, but I'm noticing a lot in the chat about, the Jay-Z lyric. Is it anti-Semitic? Is it not? Hesta embraced the lyric. Others have different opinions of it, but I want to keep focused on this 150 song list that we did, though all these people's remarks in the chat have been noted and considered, and thank you for offering them. Jen, Gilmore, is anything on this list that you're like, Adam Sandler, yeah, I don't want so much of that.
I don't mind Adam Sandler. I actually kind of thought the Jay-Z lyrics were anti-Semitic, but I'm
waiting for all the agreement to show up in the chat immediately.
But at the same time, I mean, there's a lot going on here. But okay, so I'm a fan of Captain Beefheart. However, that particular song, what's the name of it now off the top of my head?
I believe
Cocktail Blues.
Yeah, like, so this is the thing that I was thinking about. First of all, what's a pop song? We're talking about like what's a Jewish song, but like what makes something Jewish, what makes something pop? But that's a different thing, I guess. But that Captain Beefheart song, it's like he's not Jewish and he's singing about this experience. So I'm kind of curious what other people on the panels, maybe people in the comments, thought about that. I mean, let's just say, I don't want to give another example, but think of alternative examples. How did other people feel about having that song on the list?
I can't say I had a problem with it. I think, in Gary Lucas's piece, he, speaks to how the good captain, had such respect for Jewish musicians and I think the entirety of Trout Mask Replica is, that whole record really pushes the envelope and pushes the listener out of their comfort zone in a lot of different ways. And I always just felt that Daco Blues was, just along, just another way of the captain kind of poking at you. But I've never felt offended by it.
I'm not offended by it either, but in terms of it being on this list, because it's completely out of context of the album, right? It's just there. And I guess it brings up this idea of like the Jew as a symbol, the Jew as an idea. And that I think is what I'm like kind of pushing against in some of these, or like old fashioned songs, I guess. Yeah. But I
wasn't troubled by it. Again, I think in the notion that, look, this is a long, it's 150 songs, it's a lengthy list, and there's lots of, there are lots of perspectives around some of these issues. I was happy. I mean, on my list, I'm not, I have many, many listeners to the show who are huge Rush fans. And so I've listened to more Rush than I have previous in my life, but was happy to bring up the song Red Sector A, which was the song about, Geddy Lee's parents were Holocaust survivors. And Neil Peart, who wrote the lyrics for Rush, the drummer, wrote this song based on hearing about Geddy's family experiences and about Geddy telling these stories. That I think that particularly when we're talking about where do Holocaust stories fit within the matrix of what we're talking about here, there are going to be different pieces of that. There are going to be different perspectives and different relationships to that. So it didn't trouble me if the Beefheart song were maybe the only representation of that, that piece of history, that maybe would be one thing. But I feel like there's a bunch of things on here, from Ramones songs to Rush songs to, more historical songs that that's one, that's one expression of feeling about that chapter. And I'm, I was okay with that.
It's funny, we've been halfway through our discussion, and the one person we haven't heard a great deal from is the guy who put it all together, Seth. Everyone is just talking back and forth about their songs and their choices, but Seth, Seth wrote I would say a spiritual biography of Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's song Highway 61, which provides my background today, shows up #1 on our list. Also, Idiot Wind shows up as the choice you wrote to enshrine, memorialize in your essay. So Tell me about both Idiot Wind and about Highway 61 being according to us, according to you, the top greatest Jewish pop song of all time. Why Dylan? Why that song?
Well, as you said, I wrote an entire book about it, so I'll try to distill it. You know, I love the song Idiot Wind, so we'll start with that. I love it regardless of its Jewish content, or if you think there's no Jewish content. And I think it's a great song. And I think, you know, we started out this whole conversation with the parameters, and we didn't, and I should have emphasized that great is part of it. And then of course we could talk about what does that mean, but you know, it means whatever it means to the person who's selecting the song. And I wasn't surprised at all that when we tallied up all the votes, because, you know, 24 contributors sent me all their songs that they thought should be on the list, and I tallied them all up. And the biggest vote getter was Highway 61, I think for obvious reasons. You know, the first line, God said to Abraham, kill me a son. I mean, there you have it. That's, you know, Judaism in a nutshell, at least biblically and religiously. And for that matter, to some extent, Christianity. What I like about Idiot Wind for this list is that it's probably not one of the top 10 Jewish songs that people think of when they think of Bob Dylan. I mean, there are many obvious other ones. Neighborhood Bully, Everything is Broken, some of the other early protest songs that have biblical imagery. But I was just so excited when I discovered that that phrase, Idiot Wind, is actually a Talmudic phrase. In Aramaic, it's Ruach Shtuz. Many of you probably know that Ruach means wind or breath. And Dylan sings, you're an idiot, babe. It's a wonder that you still know how to breathe. So he's playing with both meanings of Ruach, and he's translating Ruach Shtuz, idiot wind, which is exactly what it is. So, you know, it was just exciting to me to discover that, and I wanted to share it with the world as much as I can.
One thing that came to mind, I was wondering, is you have a lot of artists who are iconic in their own ways, very distinct personalities. Some of these artists are no longer with us, some of them are. How do you think they would feel about being on this list? Leonard Cohen liked being on this list. Bob Dylan liked being on this list. Carole King pissed she's not on this list.
Mm.
I would think that would be more of it. That I mean, you know, if this list came out and Dylan wasn't on it anywhere, I think, you know, somewhere he would be grumbling about that.
I think any list that starts with greatest, I don't think anybody is going to be opposed to being on, you know, have resistance to being on that list. I don't think that, you know, I think to what your question is, I don't think that any of them particularly would want to be reduced to only being thought of as Jewish artists, right? Certainly not the way that they lived their spiritual lives. Certainly not if you look at what Leonard's experience was or Dylan's experience has been. But, you know, that said, clearly their Judaism was in whatever way very important to them and to their work and to their language. And so I don't think that anybody on here is going to resist the honor.
And Jennifer, you know, you wrote about Lou Reed, another kind of an interesting personality. Think he'd be happy to be A, to be on this list, and B, why did you choose the song you chose of his?
So I'm actually not a Lou Reed aficionado, really. I mean,
we're making you one tonight.
I skew more towards Dylan, but Seth's got that covered. But I think he got more into it, but to be honest, and embraced it more later in his life, like many things. I chose this song, which the name is escaping me now, My House, because I And I chose that one over like European Sun, which deals with Delmore Schwartz. So I'm writing a book and I have a fictionalized Delmore Schwartz in my book. So I've become obsessed with Delmore Schwartz. And I knew that Lou Reed was his student. And I remembered hearing that song, and this is a much more serious take on things, but this idea of teacher and student felt very Jewish to me, that Lou Reed actually was tending to Delmore Schwartz's grave in real life, not in the song, and not telling anyone. And there was that sort of care and memorial felt very Jewish to me. And the idea of just like celebrating someone who taught him like almost felt like Talmudic to me. So I even though that sounds very serious, I mean, it is a pretty serious song. I was really moved by it, and their relationship, they seem like such different personalities, but that, you know, Delmore Schwartz once told Lou Reed, if you don't use your talent, I'll like come back and kill you, kind of thing, and haunt you. And I thought that that was really beautiful, and that sort of memorial felt very Jewish to me.
So are there any, so we have this list of 150 songs. Actually, it started off at 300, and I told Seth we got to narrow it down. It's got to be 150. I mean, if you or someone were to sit down with this list of 150 songs, and that was all they could have to find out what being Jewish or Judaism meant, what do you think they would take away from that list? What do you think they would learn, having no other background whatsoever? What do you think they would learn about Judaism from that Apple, not Spotify playlist?
It's, you know, it's a really broad list, which is so inclusive of all kinds of aspects of Jewishness, with both historical and religious and cultural. So you would get quite a variety of takes on the kind of holistic and richness, that it's not just one thing. You know, I was surprised at how much Holocaust content there was. I didn't realize that was so many songwriters wrote about that. So many, in particular, you know, pop and rock. We're talking basically about pop music from the rock era. So, but, you know, obviously that's a big topic, and that's somehow colors this, you know, the post-Holocaust era is synonymous with the era that we're talking about. So, you know, it's, we're talking about the individual songs too. That's one thing. And I see a little bit in the chat, well, you know, where is Carole King? And it's like, well, it's not a question of where is Carole King. The question is, what's the Jewish song? I would love to have Carole King on this list, as I'm sure 24 of the contributors would have, but nobody came up with a song of hers that spoke to Jewishness.
I am waiting for someone in the chat to list that Carole King song. I'm watching the chat, waiting for it to come up.
Could be the Jewish song, but yeah, that was a hard one too. I was trying to find one.
Yeah, there were certainly artists that you thought of an artist and thought, what could there be from them? And there were some that came up. You know, we had people on when we had Seth and Hesta on the show, people who'd be like, well, there should be a Kiss song. I'm like, well, okay, what would be the Kiss song that would be?
I tried, man.
Kiss are plenty Jewish. What's the Kiss song? In terms of what you take from the overall list, what I mentioned to Seth last week was, it was really striking to me how much punk rock was on this list. To go back to something that came up earlier, that there's something like 15 songs from punk bands, and that's not counting the Lou Reed songs and not counting the Beastie Boys songs, and, you know, depending what you put around that. And so I think that the that sense, I think Hesta said before, the sort of inherent punkness of Judaism, of resistance, of, you know, opposition and sort of built-in countercultural, you know, radicalism that you approach the world with. That was something that really stood out, not across all 150, but as a really significant piece of what this list involved, that I, maybe hadn't thought. I mean, yes, Stephen Bieber, who was one of the contributors, wrote a book about Jews and punk rock, so it's not an original thought. But I don't know that I know that I didn't anticipate that as much of what was represented here as it turned out to be.
I have in big capital letters, what about Carole King, Been to Canaan?
I examined that song and I thought, well, but wait a minute, why has she been to Canaan? The Canaanites were the enemies of the ancient Hebrews. So why hadn't she been to Israel or Zion or something? Yes, it's called Been to Canaan, but I didn't find anything Jewish about it at all.
So we will be, and to everyone in the chat, we will be coming up with a list of all the songs we missed. And Joel Lynn says she had just come home from Israel when she wrote it, all caps. So there.
All the more reason she should have written to
anyway,
Israel.
but I mean, that's the point, is like to start a discussion and not to have all the answers necessarily. But I think we are going to be coming up with here are the lists that would be our readers' choices. So we have asked readers to send out a list to editorial@forward.com, tell us why that should have made the list, send that to us and we will publish your thoughts on it. And we will, execute editorial judgment for punctuation. But other than that, we are happy to hear your thoughts on that. The other question I wanted to ask in regard to that, I wanted to throw out just a few of the songs that people have been listing in the chat and just have our panelists weigh in on whether they should or shouldn't have been. I don't know this song, but a lot of people are mentioning a song called Jews Don't Camp. Anybody?
I love the title, but I never heard the song. I definitely want to hear it.
Camp or like aren't camp?
Jews, I think they do not camp. They do not do camping. Okay, we will put that on the list of readers' suggestions. It's by Dave Buskin, says Elizabeth Schwartz. I do not know that artist, but
yeah.
Okay. The other larger question, though, before I throw a couple other songs at you, is, there's a lot of like, what happened to the great Jewish songbook? Where is Yip Harper? Where is, God, I'm blanking, but where's Irving Berlin? Where is Stephen Sondheim? Where are why aren't those people on this list?
Yeah, well, very simple, because, this list really was conceived as the great Jewish pop songs of the rock era. We could have done it of the 20th century or the 20th and the 21st century, but we
may do that at some point.
Sure.
Seth, I have learned this trick for many years working with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The correct answer to anybody who asks why isn't so-and-so on the list is they didn't get enough votes. That is the correct response. The answer is not, well, I think it is, or I think it isn't. The correct answer is you put this to a panel and there was not a consensus. And that's why I'm assuming you didn't sit down and, do a list of, we won't have any Carole King, we won't have any. I don't think anybody was, cast out from the list. It's what gets the votes. And you do these kinds of lists to start. If you're not starting arguments, if the first reaction that people have isn't, well, why not? Then you didn't do the list right. You do these to start fights. So, for everybody who's sending that, I'll handle that answer for you.
Thank you, Alan.
That's very appropriate. Edward Saslaw, who thinks I'm an idiot for not knowing Dave Buskin's Jews Don't Camp, but I apologize for that, asks the question, who voted? Seth, do you want to talk, because it's not just the people on this list here, who else was on your esteemed panel of panelists, and how did you come up with them?
Yeah, well, we brainstormed, Adam and I brainstormed a list of people we knew or didn't know, but could get in touch with to invite them. We included musicians, writers who we had some sense would be familiar with the material. We included some musicians / writers, which I was really glad to have. So, we listed the contributors right at the top. They're from all over the place. Some are academics, some are just longtime music critics, some are have written books. It's quite a variety.
And I will apologize a little bit for hanging Seth out a little bit on this, because his article was originally called "The Greatest Pop Songs of the Rock Era," Jewish pop songs of the rock era. And I said, yeah, that's more accurate, but fewer people are actually going to read that. So we just made it greatest Jewish pop song. So my headline is a little less accurate than Seth's would have been, but I think we got a little bit or more people to hear because of the simplified headline. So my apologies for that. A couple other songs to throw out at you. Let's see if people think The Immigrant by Neil Sedaka. Should that have been on the list?
Great song, and nobody voted for it, but thanks for reminding me about it. I would have voted for it.
The other thing I think we should mention here is that those of us who voted were all tasked to submit a ballot of 20 songs. And I mean, I think most of us could have at least come up with 50 to 100 on our own. So I think, a lot of times you'll have deserving songs that, it's like, yeah, that's cool, but I like these other 20 songs more. So I think, things like The Immigrant probably fell victim to that.
Or more to the point, if you're doing a list of 10 or 20 or whatever finite is, there's going to be a certain amount of, well, if I'm doing Neil Diamond, I'm not doing also Neil. Like, I'm not going to make too many of these slots, guys from Brooklyn, the same age, coming out of the Brill building, totally. I'm going to limit myself to, I'll do, one Dylan and one Leonard Cohen song. Otherwise I could fill up with 20 of those. So Dan, you're totally right. When voters are doing it, you're making those decisions of what goes on a short list. And then those short lists come into a longer list that sometimes end up boxing out, the other things that would have fit within a certain category.
Exactly.
And Alan, I do want to ask you that, since you are, the resident expert on Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, and you were a primary source for a piece that we did on Hallelujah last year.
Sure.
That wasn't our top Jewish song from Leonard Cohen on our list. It showed up at around maybe 28. I forget what our number one.
30 something, yeah. Number one was You Want It Darker, that came in the highest on your list. It was not.
If you were doing the list, would you have flipped that around, or do you think that was right?
Well, my vote, again, in limiting myself to one per person and not more than that, my one Leonard Cohen vote was for Who by Fire, because I just didn't think you could go more Jewish than just setting a Yom Kippur prayer to a song, and particularly point people to the version that he did with Sonny Rollins on a TV show called Night Music. That's extraordinary. Look, Hallelujah, I spent, an inordinate amount of my time thinking and writing about that song and everything that's happened with that song. And among many other things, I do think Hallelujah is a Jewish song. I think that's one of the things that it is. But there are more, I think there are more explicitly, sort of functionally Jewish songs that in Leonard's catalog. You Want It Darker as the top vote getter, with him, singing in Hebrew with the choir from the synagogue in Montreal that he attended. I can't much argue with that as a selection. Hallelujah is interesting. The best conversation that I had about Hallelujah for the book was with a rabbi in Jerusalem who uses it within their high holiday services, and uses it because of its, because of the things that are ambiguous about it, because of the things that are, non-doctrine about it. She says the one thing that makes it Jewish is it just asks a lot of questions that it, doesn't answer with any sort of Jewishness or scripture or anything else. And that's the most Jewish thing that you can do with a song. And I absolutely, loved her reasoning for that, but also get why, for the purposes of this list, I'm glad to see some others came in higher. I think they show people were thinking about it a little harder than just going with the greatest hit.
Great. And Jennifer, you were listening to this list. I just want to make sure everyone, we have about 10 more minutes left of this conversation. please use the chat for questions, not just song suggestions. Happy to have this panel answer anything. Most of the people who are listening are just like throwing out songs, and I'm happy to throw out songs to our group. But if there are questions you have, please feel free to put those in the chat as well. And Jennifer, you listened to a big chunk of this today, I think you said. So how did it hold together for you? Were you skipping a bunch? Were you listening to it all the way through?
Well, I had listened to it before, but I was really sort of going in and out and trying to sort of wrap my head around Tush by ZZ Top, but because they didn't even pronounce it right. But anyway, no, it does hold together. And I think to what Seth is saying, it really speaks to, again, I know this might sound academic, or just to the variousness of the Jewish experience and the coolness of it, the seriousness of it, the longevity of it, the radicalism of it, and who is embracing it, which I thought was really interesting. And I was surprised about, as Alan said, a lot of all the Holocaust material, because one doesn't think that's going to make a great tune. So that was really interesting, but it does really hold together, and seen as a group, it works really. It genre-wise, it's interesting because there's all kinds of music in there. I think my favorite might have been the Randy Newman that spoke to assimilation. I hadn't thought of that. I had Randy Newman on my list, but not that song. What was the name of the song again?
The Dixie Flyer?
Yeah, Dixie Flyer. Such an amazing song, and the richness of that experience, what he gets in there, I loved it. I listened to it over and over again today.
Anybody else after listening to this? And you can put this in the chat as well, but anyone on this panel, look at the list and start listening to something they hadn't listened before, or listening more closely to it?
I guess I was actually, I'm a huge Robin Hitchcock fan, and it didn't even occur to me to think like, oh yeah, he has some songs that with Jewish references. So that was sort of like a light bulb moment for me to see not one but two of his songs on this list.
He actually spent time on a kibbutz when he was a younger man.
That would explain it.
And Robin Hitchcock, one of several artists who has retweeted the article. Robin Hitchcock retweeted us along with Peter Hilvelman, Jill Sobule, and a couple of Rob Tannenbaum, who had a song on the list as well. Though, was anybody else who has been interacting with us, Seth, on this? Was that? I want to say there was one other, but
yeah, I feel like there was one other, but it escapes me.
Neil Diamond has yet to retweet it, despite.
Do want to say, just because I've seen a couple of people ask about reggae songs and Jews and Rastafarianism, because there are some on there. I know I put Rivers of Babylon by the Melodians from the Harder They Come soundtrack on my list, since again it ruined forever the chance of during high holiday services that I sing that to whatever melody the Chazan is singing, because I'm in my head I'm singing the Melodians version. But Bob Marley's on the list. Some other things that touch those traditions are in here, Seth, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, as you said last week on your SiriusXM program, because Rastafarianism has so much roots or themes or draws concepts from Judaism, and because so many reggae songs are rooted in Rastafarianism, it could, we could do a list of 150 reggae songs that are Jewish, but you have to, that's not what we were doing.
Yeah, I was thinking also of best Christian songs by Jewish artists might be a good list that we could come up with as well, because I think we could come up with I could come up with 50 pretty easily. And we're always looking for sequels to these things we do. The next
Dylan
sequel,
would
as
be
I said,
number one on that one too.
Exactly. No, it's true. Yeah, someone said in the chat, suggested Every Grain of Sand, which could make the top Jewish and top Christian at the same time, which is a neat trick if you could do it. Yes, Jay Ridd, Matzes Yahoo, it does make the list. I forget which song of his did make the list.
Yeah, he's there.
Anyway, I wanted just to ask one more time if there are questions that people have in the chat that they would like to throw out to our panelists. And I started this conversation by asking what was the one thing you listened to today on the way out? We're going to leave this conversation. We're going to think about it. We're going to think about the Jewishness of these songs. You're going to go back out of your squares into your real lives. And what are you going to be listening to once you're done with this talk, everybody? Alan, what's next queued up on your final?
That's going to start from looking at what are we doing on the show tomorrow.
Well, you have to know. Yeah.
That's a little bit because I know we have the great New Orleans soul singer Irma Thomas coming on the show tomorrow, so I know I have to listen to some to prep for that with her tomorrow. What else will I be listening to tonight? It's a fair question. My wife is in a heavy, still in a Get Back obsession. Seth, you're talking about Beatles, and I went once, she went twice to the IMAX rooftop concert presentation over the weekend. Came back and watched it. Yes, somebody mentioning the documentary on Irma on PBS. That is why we are having her on the show tomorrow. That's exactly right. I don't know. Jennifer talking about Lou Reed may send me a little bit back into that. That's sort of rattling around in my head right now. So that may come up at least in the morning, if not before.
Dan, what are you going to pull off your shelf once you're done here?
Well, Alan talking about Rivers of Babylon, like now that's churning in my head, and I realize like it's been way too long since I've put on the Harder They Come soundtrack. So I think that's my next stop.
Jennifer?
We can't. Somebody tweeted what's the connection between Rastafarianism and Judaism?
How much time you got?
Yeah, way too much for us to get into here, but it's all Old Testament stuff, and go just research that out for 5 minutes, and you'll see that these are pretty inseparable strands.
Jennifer, what are you going to queue up?
Probably Dylan. I can't get. I mean, really, like I didn't vote enough for Dylan. I'm feeling so bad because I knew everyone else would, and I was like, oh, what else can we do? But now I'm like out of Jewish guilt, I'm gonna have to listen to Dylan for like the next 3 days straight.
Seth, what you got lined up?
Well, like I say, for me, it's George Harrison and the Beatles 24/7 for the next year.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody who listened, and thank you everyone who participated. Thank you to Hesta Prynn, who had to leave us but made a memorable impression in the 25 minutes she was here. Thanks to Alan Light, Dan Epstein, Jennifer Gilmore, and Seth Rogovoy. This conversation has been recorded and will be sent to all participants, whether you want it or not. It'll show up in your inbox very shortly. And again, if you have songs that you think should have made the list, we will write about them. Just tell us what the song is, tell us why, send it to editorial@forward.com. That is editorial@forward.com. And Seth and I will go over it, and we will come up with your list of the songs that should have been on our list. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a most excellent rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.